It's time to get to our explainer here tonight, and we're talking about what you are hearing, the COVID variants, the Brazilian, the South African, and that from the UK, and just whether they are responding to the vaccines. There's much talk and much concern about this, but sometimes all of this jargon is thrown around. So let's understand a few things first, before we get into those specific variants that are being discussed in the world right now. So it's important to understand one thing, that viruses are rather unstable particles. They're not even human, they're not even cells as we know them. They're rather unstable. And so what happens is they mutate or change in their shape and form every single day. In fact, every time a virus gets into the body, it's encountering the immune system, it's encountering drugs. So what happens is it's responding to this pressure from your immune system and therefore starts to mutate, to change in its form, all right? Now, they're of course doing this to try and adapt and survive to all of the pressures that are in. So many times the virus enters your body, but the way in which it leaves in a completely different form, all right? Now, the viruses that replicate faster, like the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19, are more susceptible to changes and to these mutations that we're talking about. Now, around the world, there's over, would you believe it, 1,000 COVID-19 variants that exist. Most of these variants are of no consequence. Okay, so they change in no way. In fact, some of those mutations actually cause the virus itself to die, because the process of replication is not exact, neither is it a perfect process. However, even out of those thousands of variants that exist, there are some that you have heard, even from the Ministry of Health, being termed as variants of concern. Now, they would become variants of concern if they satisfy a number of these. So one, if those mutations, which are about maybe 2 to 4 mutations, then cause a variant, which is something that is somewhat different from the original, all right? Now, they would cause concern if, one, they, for example, escape diagnosis, right? The current methods we're using to test are like the PCR test, which is in itself one that detects the genetic makeup. So if it is able to escape the current diagnostic test that we're using, then of course that is cause for concern. Why? Because it could lead to false negatives, and that is not something we want. Any other variant of concern would be one that would be cause the variant or the virus to be more transmissible or cause more severe disease. And more severe disease could obviously also mean more deaths. Or one that escapes the immune system, meaning it has changed in shape and form and is able to combat your body's immune system. Or the other reason that would cause that variant to become one of concern is when they escape current vaccines, meaning the vaccines that are in use at the moment are no longer effective with that variant. Now, how do you determine whether a variant is one of concern and how it is moving? Well, what it is simply is, first, you do genetic sequencing. Remember, we already have the genetic sequence for the original that we know of that came from Wuhan. And so what you do in all of these samples is you do genetic sequencing to see if the genetic sequence or code has changed. But also, you want to determine whether it fulfills any of these, whether it's escaping diagnosis or indeed current vaccines. Well, that is where the issue of contact tracing is very important, because you want to take a look at who's being infected, how are they being infected, what sort of signs and symptoms do they have. It is basically tracing the epidemiology of that specific variant, all right? You are testing it against clinical history. Does it cause more disease? Does it spread faster? For example, did it spread from me to 5 people or from me to 15 people in a short span of time? These are some of the things that you do. So you're testing it against clinical history to determine whether it is one that causes concern or not. So, do we have variants of concern? We do, and you've heard these terms around. Let's start with this one, the UK variant, which has been given this genetic code, B117. Now, it first emerged in September last year, and the mutation is actually, I know if you can see it here on my image, in this little spike protein. Now, the spike protein is the one that the virus particle uses to gain entry into the cells. And so what's happening is it is enabling it to invade cells faster. And so you're starting to hear that the UK variant is more highly transmissible than the original. It is now the dominant strain in the United Kingdom and has been recorded in 50 countries, if not more, around the world. Now, it spreads more easily, spreads quickly, and therefore this variant can be said to be more highly transmissible. Now, like we said, these viruses are mutating all the time. There's reports that this strain and this variant is already mutating again. This is something that happens constantly. Let's take a look at this one closer home, the South African variant, given this genetic code B1351. It was first recorded in October of last year. It's now in at least over 20 countries. Now, it's also caused the changes in the spike protein, meaning it's able to invade the cells faster and more quickly, meaning it is more transmissible. But it also has another important change in a protein called E484K. No need to worry about that, but it is significant in that it also helps the virus to evade the antibodies in your immune system. That is what helps you fight COVID-19. And that is why it is also thought then to cause more severe disease, because your body's immune system is not able to effectively fight it as much as the other variant, okay? So the South African variant, more highly transmissible, causing more severe disease. And then we've got this one, the Brazil variant. Now, this is the more recent one. Given this genetic code, P1, first identified in Brazilian travelers who were in Japan early this year, that's early January. It also has changes in the spike protein, meaning it's more highly transmissible, and it also has changes that we're talking about that enable it evade the body's immune system. So it's highly transmissible and also causes severe disease. And of course, if you put those together, then causes significantly more number of deaths. Now, the questions, of course, are, do these respond to the current COVID vaccines that are out there? And there are several. The answer, according to scientists, is yes, even though those vaccines may be not as effective as they were with the other variants. So, for example, you saw in South Africa, they discontinued use of Oxford AstraZeneca because it was not that it's not effective at all, it's just not highly effective. And so they switched to Johnson & Johnson, which is more effective over these variants. So here's another one. It's important to note that even though it's not as effective, it's still is effective in protecting against severe illness. Another thing to note about the Brazil variant is there have been cases of reinfection. Why? Because again, like we said, it is evading the body's immune system. So all of the current vaccines that were made before these variants came in are still effective, just not as much. And which is why scientists know this. You know of boosters, right? That happen from time to time. That is why they create those. Let me give you an example. The polio disease that is caused by the polio vaccine. If you recall, there are boosters that are had every so often when it spikes up again. That's probably because the virus has mutated and they're creating boosters to try and make sure they counter the new variants that are coming in. I'd like to address the issue of the Tanzanian variants that you're hearing. You see, like we said, it's not enough to just say there are mutations because, like we've said, the mutations are happening all the time. But scientists are still studying and still subjecting that Tanzanian variant to the tests we talked about, right? So they're taking a look at who it's infecting, why, how, the severity of the disease, how much it moves, whether it moves faster or slower than the others. And so they say, wait until those studies are done. Are there any other of these variants that have been recorded in the country? Yes. These variants have been recorded in the country, but the Ministry of Health says not to levels that are concerning. But are there other variants? Yes, there are that have been recorded in the country. In fact, between June and October last year, KEMRI sequenced at least 16 new mutations that they found to be harmless and of no consequence. Now, I want to close with this one. One, it's still important to get any vaccine that is out there, be it Sputnik 5, Oxford AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, whichever, because even though they may not be as effective, they still do prevent severe illness, which is what you are trying to prevent. Now, it's also important to note that the more a virus spreads, the more it replicates. The more it replicates, the more variants that we have out there. And so the bottom line still remains that both on the government's end and for individuals like you and I, the goal is still to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The fewer hosts it has, the less it replicates, the less variants of concern that we have, the more effective the vaccines that are available. And so, if you want to get rid of all of these variants of concern, simple, stop the spread of COVID-19. That's my explainer tonight. Stay